Hello and welcome to the Illumio Cloud Security Series. Here we are on, I think, topic number 3, almost losing count. Today we're talking about new processes and old models and how incongruent they actually are, i.e. what we're talking about is old processes that we leveraged in the data center and how do we transfer those over to the cloud environments? Are they even transferable? I think the answer might be no, not exactly, but it depends on where you are in your cloud maturity journey. So here with me today, Jeff Stopper, our technical marketing engineer here at Illumio, to discuss this process and what organizations are actually going through when they're lifting and shifting and transferring data and critical applications over to the cloud. What does it actually mean from a processes perspective? And how do we really capitalize on the benefits of the cloud when we're having to update our processes to match the new model and paradigm shift that is public cloud? So Jeff, thank you so much for joining me.
I'm ready to roll. Let's do it.
Okay, so you and I have talked a little bit about this before, and really what it boils down to is the tension that starts to build as organizations move critical applications over to public cloud models. It's like, maybe the shift happens more quickly than we can update our processes, that being like how we control, monitor, and enforce policy can't be the same as it is in the data center. So I guess my first question to you is, how soon after cloud migration do organizations really start to experience the friction between, say, a centralized control, policy, monitoring, security processes, moving over to the new paradigm model in the cloud, which is really more decentralized methods that are more compatible with like cloud native workflows, cloud native workloads, right?
Right. Yeah. I can think of 2 ways to answer this. The first one would be, you're asking about how soon. I would say within like the first 5 or 10 seconds of actually trying to do something. So what I mean by that is, the first time you actually try to implement something in the cloud, you're going to run into all kind of immediate barriers, right? If you don't have proper processes in place on how to do things. And I'm talking even something simple like spinning up a virtual machine. Do you have the right permissions to do so? Is the image you want to use available and loaded that's approved by your company? Where do you apply security to that new image, right? There's different layers of applying security. What account should I put this under, right? Like there's questions about billing, what account do I use? Does it get billed back to the right department? Those kind of things. And then, maybe I should come up with a tagging scheme to figure out who owns this application so I can figure out 6 months from now, who's the owner of that, who's getting the bills for it. Like all these kind of questions come up the first time you try to do something.
Wow.
The second answer I would say would be the first time you have a significant outage, because there's nothing quite like a good outage to bring a company together. And when I say bring a company together, I mean 30 people in a room yelling at each other to figure out, okay, what just went wrong, right? So outages are a really good way to figure out, okay, what really just happened? You have to dig deeper into the architecture to figure out, did we design this thing wrong, right? Like networks are very different in a cloud than they are in a physical data center. Did your operations team have access? Were they able to troubleshoot and get logs? And, all the ways in which you run a company and a network is very different in the cloud. So that's another great area where you immediately run up against issues of process and models of how you do things, and you got to work through those. So those are the 2 extremes I can think of.
Those are great examples. And you made me think of something here. I remember when we first started transitioning to the cloud, when it was initially a hot topic, 10 plus years ago, the concept was you're putting your stuff in someone else's data center. It was like same stuff, different data center. The only difference is you're not dealing with the baggage that comes with the data center. You don't have to worry about the power and the redundancy and the power grids that you're on. And you don't have to worry about how cool everything is inside of the data center. You don't have to worry about your applications having enough storage capacity. You are paying for that application to live in the cloud, in someone else's data center, and you're accessing it. Like that was kind of the concept in the beginning stages of cloud. And now it's a whole different paradigm. Like it's cloud native architecture that requires new tools, new processes. My dog is very upset that she's not getting to play right now.
She has an opinion.
Yeah. What do you have to say about data center, Jackie? She has no response. She's speechless now. So, new processes regarding visibility, ephemeral environments, dynamically changing. Like it's not as if you know exactly which rack in the data center your application lives on. It's not as if you have clear visibility between communication of applications, depending on whether or not they're in the same VPC in a single cloud, say AWS, right? Or if they're in a NSG group versus a VPC group in Azure to AWS, like you lost visibility and you don't know where exactly to troubleshoot. And so what are some of the incompatibilities moving from data center to the cloud from an operational and processes perspective? I think you highlighted some of those as far as like when you start to experience friction, but if you could give me a few examples of where this really starts to, where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, I can think of two primary ways. One, which you sort of touched on, you mentioned in a data center, you were concerned about, things like power and space and where you're putting servers. So the whole cost structure is very different on how you're spending money in a cloud, right? To your point, you were worried about power and cooling and keeping your hot aisles hot and your cold aisles cold in a data center. Cloud's very different. You're paying for processing time and the number of resources you're spinning up. And so if you've got an application that's straddling between still running at a data center and you're trying to move it to cloud, how do you equate the cost of what it's going to cost to run that application when it's a very different environment and the way that it's being built, right? So I think it's hard to really figure out what it's going to cost you from that sense to move that application into the cloud. And having the proper controls set up to understand those costs and who's going to get billed for it and who's going to get those accounts are taken care of. Right. The other one that I was kind of naive to when I started messing around with cloud was the whole concept of identity and access management and how much that is so granular and it touches everything. The ability to allow or permit someone to do any minutiae little task or make any kind of API call, right? You can control that to such a fine level that, it's a double-edged sword, right? It gives you a lot of power to control who can do what and set up proper permissions. But with this whole decentralized IT thing we have going on where individual groups can start spinning up their own applications and services, it also gives them a lot of freedom to do things wrong as well, right? They can forget to set up security controls or forget to restrict permissions on who can do what with that. So having a good identity and access policy figured out ahead of time before you get down that road too far, I think is crucial to making sure you're successful, to make sure everyone stays in their lane and, does things with the proper policies wrapped around it.
Yeah. And that might actually mean adopting new tools, right? So that leads me to my next question. Everybody talks about, the reasons to move to the cloud, the benefits, the value that you get out of it. You get faster time to market, you get innovation. Everybody wants that continuous innovation, integration, continuous development pipeline, right? Everybody wants to experience the full glory of the cloud, but to do that, you've touched on some of those processes and the people and the roles and responsibility that need to be in place. So a strategy is definitely key. And if you haven't watched our cloud migration, how to migrate to the cloud and challenges in securing the cloud videos and blogs prior to this episode, go back and watch it because we do dive into those details there a little bit more. But for the purposes of new processes or new model, old processes, what are those technical adoptions that companies should start to prioritize to really fully realize the benefits that the cloud has to offer?
In my mind, it always comes down to people and getting your people trained up on what they're doing. With cloud, it's easy to just, they abstract away a lot of the details about how things work. And so it's easy just to to click on things and push the easy button and get something up and operational, but do you really know what's going on behind the scenes? And that's the difference between, I call, users of a technology versus knowers of that technology. Like, it's easy just to put your code out in Amazon and spin up a Lambda function and say, oh, sweet, now I can, my code's loaded in the cloud and I can have it do things. But what's really going on? Like understanding the implications of that, who can access that code, or what kind of network requirements are set up behind the scenes. So I'm a big proponent of having your ops teams be very smart and have all the operational tools to troubleshoot and fix things, which means really understanding how the cloud actually works. Like, I'm an old network guy. I'm used to installing routers and running cables. You get to the cloud and you do things like spin up a subnet to your virtual machine, and suddenly it has magical access to the internet. And I'm like, well, how did that happen? Routers are just kind of popping in and out of existence, and you don't know,
Right.
They do all this behind the scenes to make it easy for you. But if you don't understand the implications of that, it can also leave you exposed. So making sure your team is really deeply knowledgeable about what's going on and the effect of when you click on something, what really happens. I think that's critical.
Yeah, that's a really good point. People, processes, and technology, accounting for those three things and starting with the people is probably a great step one, because who's going to operate those tools? Who's going to enforce those policies? Who's responsible for visibility, security, and management of your workloads as they go in and out of these environments? I mean, we're going to live in a hybrid world, so we're going to have to account for it as well, right? We're going to have to operate in the interim before we fully maximize a mature cloud, workload process. So any lead, the one last thing I wanted to mention about the cloud and fully realizing the benefits of that. It really reminds me of, like, if I had an iPhone and all I ever used it for was to make phone calls and nothing else. It's like, yeah, but you're not really getting the return on that phone yet until you start to leverage it for other things. So I think that's the direction in which we are going to see organizations and industries as a whole pivot to very swiftly over the next 5 years. I think we're going to see cloud maturity really grow. And I'm excited to see those processes evolve. I think 10 years from now, we'll be talking about how this was old news. So it's inevitable. Change is inevitable. But any final points, final thoughts, and recommendations you'd like to leave for the audience here, whoever and wherever they are?
The cloud is a great thing, but just make sure you understand what's going on behind the scenes. It's tempting just to push the easy button and use all the fancy new tools. I think Brian mentioned this in one of the earlier sessions, right? But you don't always have to use those shiny new tools if it's not appropriate for where you're at in your journey, right? So just make sure you understand what you're really doing behind the scenes and make sure it's appropriate. So that's it for me.
Yeah, digest what you can, when you can, as it makes sense for your organization. Grow slowly, crawl before you walk before you run, maybe.
There you go.
All right, well, there you have it. New processes I keep messing that up. New model, old processes. There you go, tongue twister. I hope this was helpful for you all. If you want to continue to listen and read about this topic, follow along with the blog. There's some referenceable material there. You can click on those links. Until then, we'll see you next time.